Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today I am here to talk about how Yuji might end up using the flames, the ways that Yuji might end up using the flames, and the path for Yuji to awaken Sukuna's flames in the future. This is mainly because in the most recent chapter we found out both how the flames function as well as how Sukuna utilizes the flame, and most of all the most important drawbacks for the flames, so I want to speculate today on how Yuji might end up using the flames, because I don't think he's going to use them in the same way Sukuna does, and the necessary steps that will be in the way in mastering the flames. Now, the main reason that I do think Yuji is going to use the flames is because the flames are much more fitting for Yuji as a curse technique, even in comparison to cleave and dismantle. After all, fire has seemed to be something that actually did fit pretty well with Yuji as a character, and that is something that a lot of people have pointed out, me myself included, in the past. It led to a lot of people believing that it could be potentially possible that Yuji's fire arrow originally came from him, or that Yuji would end up utilizing the fire arrow from manifesting Sukuna's curse technique, which it seems to be the second one is definitely going to happen now that we also have it confirmed that the fire arrow is certainly part of Sukuna's curse technique. However, before I even get into how Yuji's going to utilize the fire arrow, I'm going to talk about what is necessary in order for the fire arrow to be utilized, as it does actually have some requirements for it to be utilized. Number 1, the ingredients must be prepared through cleave and dismantle. Number 2, and this is going to be the other important thing, which is the fire arrow is innately slow as a projectile despite having immense firepower. Sukuna got around this by forcing a binding vow onto the fire arrow where it was only able to hit one target unless inside of a domain. For example, that's why Jogo ended up being burnt to a crisp in comparison to Mahoraga, who basically got nuked out of the world. Now, the main important one that I think needs to be talked about is the first one, which is the fact that the ingredients must be prepared through cleave and dismantle, which Yuji is going to likely need to master using cleave and dismantle, or at least his variant of cleave and dismantle, which we as a community have come to call clip and snip. However, it's only a matter of time until Yuji masters that technique. After all, Sukuna specifically called out that the reason why Yuji's technique output was so low in comparison to Sukuna himself was because the technique had freshly awakened. However, it should also be noted at that time Yuji had only landed a total of 2 black flashes, and as we know, each and every single black flash individually helps the user utilize their technique and utilize their curse energy better. So Yuji might be even better at using his curse energy and might be even closer on the path to mastering that technique. Furthermore, we also know the more and more Yuji utilizes it, the better and better he is going to get with it. So it's not a matter of if he will master that technique, it is simply a matter of when he's going to master that technique. Especially considering it is stated by Urami that Yuji has the same latent potential as Sukuna. So if he does have that same latent potential, Yuji is just going to keep growing and growing, and it's only going to be a matter of time for him to awaken the fire. However, you might be wondering this, how is Yuji going to overcome the main drawback of the technique? Because Sukuna's way of overcoming it was through setting that binding vow on it, because the fire arrow is innately very slow. So what binding vow is Yuji going to place on himself in order to overcome it? That's the thing. I don't think he's actually going to place a binding vow on it in order to overcome that drawback. The reason why I say this is mainly because of one thing and one thing alone. The most dangerous thing about Yuji is his combat sense and his hand-to-hand combat. His hands are by far and away his most dangerous weapon, so I don't think he's going to place a binding vow on himself in order to make it so it can be turned into a projectile. Furthermore, it will be a good way to be the opposite of Sukuna while still carrying Sukuna's exact same moveset, where Sukuna uses it like a massive ranged attack of a nukes. Yuji uses it through his hand-to-hand. It also shows even more the differences between their mentalities and how they act as fighters. While Yuji is willing to do anything, he's not going down the same path as Sukuna in order to reach the level of Sukuna, where Sukuna ended up utilizing binding vows to their utmost limit in order to push out the absolute limits of his jujutsu. Yuji instead uses his body to his advantage to make up for the weaknesses of the technique. Basically, Yuji himself becomes the projectile. Because of the fact that he's not firing it out, he's able to overcome this drawback of the fire arrow not having that good of a projectile speed. He himself is the projectile. He himself is what fires the fire out directly from his fist. And because it's coming from his body, instead the fire arrow will move equal to his own speed rather than needing a binding vow for it to be useful as a projectile. Also, because imagine Yuji utilizing this with a black flash and on a way to make Yuji's punches even more deadly than they already are, where not just does he have the physical force of his own punches, but he has the immense force behind the fire arrow itself, mainly because the fire arrow is immensely powerful. But most of all, the reason why I believe he's going to utilize it like that is because of the way that Yuji has been training up until this point, where everything that Yuji had learned over the 1 month time skip, as well as how Yuji is even fighting now, is more so to aid his current fighting style rather than fighting like somebody anybody else. He isn't a ranged blood manipulation user, nor is he a ranged cleave and dismantle user. He is still ultimately a punch kick merchant, so him creating the ultimate hand-to-hand combat method, him becoming the ultimate hand-to-hand fighter, where anyone who is close to him is effectively dead, is something that seems very in character for Yuji in my opinion. Plus, it also feeds into the entire narrative that Sukuna was talking about earlier of the difference in the eras and how that utilizes a curse technique. For example, Yuji uses cleave and dismantle as scissors, while Sukuna uses it as knives. So if Yuji were to use it in close combat like gloves, in comparison to how Sukuna uses it as an arrow for a furnace, would make a lot of sense. The same technique, but with two different ways of using it because of the two different eras it was born in. However, there is a second way that I think Yuji might actually end up utilizing the flames, and that is mainly inspired by what has happened in the most recent chapter and Choso and Yuji's conversation. In the conversation between the two of them, Choso made a statement which was, it is the job of the younger brother to surpass the older sibling, which Yuji had already done in terms of reverse curse technique knowledge, so now I think the next place is going to end up surpassing Choso is in terms of blood manipulation. However, the question had always existed, at least for me and several other people, of how Yuji could even surpass Choso in terms of blood manipulation, other than just performing what Choso did but it hitting a bit harder. Especially considering we don't know what Yuji's blood manipulation is currently capable of. Now, beforehand, he wasn't capable of using convergence, but that was before Yuji had utilized 7 black flashes, which 7 black flashes would have massively amped Yuji's capability of using the technique, so he might be capable of using convergence. But if you can get where I'm going with this, you might be able to tell where I'm going with this. I think Yuji might be able to use the flames with blood manipulation. The reason why I believe he might end up using the flames with blood manipulation is because blood manipulation would allow Yuji to overcome the massive speed weakness while using it as a projectile. Basically, imagine this. He keeps piercing blood and ignites piercing blood using the flame arrow, taking advantage of piercing blood's already a fast speed with the piercing blood damage on top of that, thus allowing Yuji to do what Sukuna could do without needing to put so much effort into making binding vows in order to bypass it, because Yuji has another gift from his brothers that he's going to use to its fullest, like how Choso would have wanted him to use. After all, Choso wanted him to surpass him, and there's no better way to surpass him by infusing another technique, being the fire, infused into Yuji's blood manipulation, using the two of them as one technique. Now, this would be much later into the battle if this even does happen, because the amount of skill that I imagine it would take in order to mix blood manipulation and fire arrow in order for it to utilize, already considering how much skill it needs in order to just use the upper levels of blood manipulation as well as the fire arrow, so it would certainly require much later into the fight, if not maybe into the future, so I see this one being much less likely in comparison to Yuji using fire manipulation and the fire arrow in hand-to-hand. However, I do see this being possible as well. I do also think that Yuji, no matter what, is going to surpass Choso in terms of blood manipulation, especially with what has been established in this chapter, that it is the younger sibling's role to surpass the older sibling. This is also because I think there's a lot of really cool combinations that can be done with blood manipulation and fire manipulation when used together like this, and it would be really cool to see this happen, which is why I mentioned this theory. After all, a lot of JJK happens because it's really cool, let's be real. But that's about everything. I'm gonna see you later. Peace.